I am Judy Castleberry, and I'm pleased to be doing this interview today on behalf of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, specifically the San Antonio de Bear chapter in San Antonio, Texas. We are interviewing Luis Arturo Jimenez, and it's September the 11th, 2014. Luis was born in Presidio, Texas in 1937. He served in the United States Air Force from 1957 to 1979, reaching the rank of captain. He has an interesting story to tell, and we're looking forward to hearing it. So, Luis, tell us about growing up in Presidio.
Presidio, Texas is a small border town along the Rio Grande, about 150 miles down the river from El Paso. And back then, when I was born in the 1937, that little town had about 600, 700 people. It was a real small community. Everybody knew everybody. And really, you couldn't get in hardly any trouble. Being a border town, we had accessibility to whatever Mexico had, because we did go to Mexico and join the festivities, and we had parties, and we could go freely back and forth. And so they could also come to us, but basically they came to get hard quality goods in Presidio, made in the USA. What we went over there for in Ojinaga, Mexico, was, like I said, was to have a good time, dances, tardeadas, weddings, baptisms, anything. And it was a real nice, enjoyable city that I can remember. And I did that from the time that I was, about 10 to 16 years old. Those were the years, the best years of my life, because there was hardly any policing to be done by the authorities, because everybody behaved, and they couldn't hardly give you a ticket. They couldn't put you in jail or arrest you, because there was probably a cousin or a brother or a sister involved, being that the town was so small. So we just behaved the best we could, and we did. We never got in trouble, into any serious trouble, and it was really nice growing up in the city of Presidio. And it wasn't until in the latter part of my third and fourth year in elementary school that my parents, and again, I'll digress a little bit and talk about my parents. My parents, my father went into the Navy. And after he returned from the Navy, he bought his employer's, what used to be my employer's, store. So my father bought the store, and for the next 30 years, he and my mother ran the store very successfully. In fact, they ran it so successfully, they were able to afford 3 kids a full college education. And my 2 brothers, I have 2 brothers, Jose Antonio Jimenez and Francisco Javier Jimenez. They both have degrees from college. They're retired now. Javier, my little brother, was a school teacher for 33 years. My brother, my middle brother, he was a Air Force maintenance support officer in the Air Force. And of course, I joined the Air Force in '57. But going back to my Presidio days, my dad joined the Navy just before the war ended, and he wasn't in the Navy very long, but nevertheless he was in the Navy. And our household was conducted in a very organized manner, because my parents really worked a lot and they were out of the house, and we had to stay around and behave, and we had to look after ourselves. Now, that was one of the reasons that my parents sent me to boarding school in Castroville, Texas. That's 20 miles away from San Antonio. And this school was called Moy Military School. And but going back to why my mother chose Moy Military School, because she had always envisioned me as being a military man. And I can vouch for that, because ever since I was a tot, she used to dress me in military uniforms or Navy uniforms. And we took pictures of the whole family. And she kind of expected me to become a military person. And I did. But going back, the Moy Military School, I started going to that school at 4th grade. I was 9 years old, and Presidio is 500 miles away from Castroville. So in other words, my mother thought a lot about getting my the best education that they could have, and they did. So they sent me 500 miles away to Moy Military School. And while I was in school, I spent 5 years. I graduated from the 8th grade from Moy Military School. And I used to go back and forth on the trains. I would catch the bus in San Antonio and go on the bus to Marfa. They would meet me in Marfa. Or I would catch the train. Back then it was called the Southern Pacific, and now it's called Amtrak. And there for a while it was called the Sunset Limited. So I was very familiar in coming and going from Presidio to San Antonio and San Antonio to Presidio. Now mind you, I was 9, 10, 11-year-old kid. I was traveling by myself. That's the confidence my parents instilled in me. And I don't think I ever failed them, because I never got lost. I never deviated from what the plan was. We always had a plan. And I have right now on this desk a few pictures showing my different phases from the time I was 4 years old until I was commissioned a 2nd lieutenant in the Air Force. But
you hold up the childhood pictures.
My first picture is, this is I think I was 4 or 5 years old, and yet my mother dressed me in military uniforms. The military that I have on is Sears Special, and we ordered everything out of the Sears catalog. And as time went by, this is another picture where she dressed me as a Navy man, just like my father. And everything about us was military. And this is my graduation picture from Moy Military School. I was 14 years old. I graduated from that school as captain of Company A. And 5 years, those 5 years instilled in me a discipline that few, if any, that I can really think I got. The discipline that helped me along in the Air Force. From the 8th grade, I went to St. Edward's High School in Austin. And of course I graduated from there. And that, although it wasn't a military school, but I still maintained the principles and the education and the discipline that I had gotten in Moy Military School. That's a dear school for me. And then after graduating from high school, I joined the Air Force. That was in 1957. And I was ready for the world. But before then, just a year before then, I went to the University of Texas. Well, I thought I was so smart, and I thought I knew everything, and college for me would be a breeze, since I had gone through all these military schools. I had the education, I had the principles and discipline. I said, how hard can it be? Well, based on that, I kind of got my eye off the ball, and I didn't do so well, so I said, enough of that. I only went to school 1 year, to the University of Texas at Austin. I said, nope, I need to do the things that I really want to do before I commit myself to a military career. or a college education. Although back then I wanted to be a pharmacist all along. In fact, when I was going to the University of Texas, I was enrolled in the School of Pharmacy. But that was not to be, at least not from from Texas University. So I joined the Air Force in '57, and of course, before joining, I was assured that I would be going to pharmacy school, to a pharmaceutical school in the Air Force, and I did. I got to be a pharmacy specialist. I went through all the required training, the practical training, the on-the-job training, and I was on independent duty sometimes. I went in pharmacy. I had complete control of the pharmacy, all the drugs. By then I had knowledge of just about all the drugs in the pharmacy, where they were located, and what it took to read a prescription. All the doctors had great confidence in me, and I was very successful. I made rank pretty quick. I came to be a tech sergeant in less than 9 years, which is below the zone. So things were going real good for me. However, when I was sent to England, to the UK, my last 2 years in the Air Force, and Lord and behold, I went over there, I fell in love. So I had to leave my girlfriend over here, which is my wife, and I went to Sculthorpe, but then I wanted to get married, but back then to come and get married would cost a fortune. So instead I let my enlistment run out. I got the Air Force to ship me back to the States. I got out knowing that after 90 days I could go back into the Air Force. I was able to keep my rank. I would lose nothing, and at the same time I would be able to get married. So that's exactly what I did. I came back from the UK, I got married, and then I joined the Air Force. I re-enlisted in the Air Force, and my first base was Dice Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. And my wife and I, that was our first permanent change of stations, the first Air Force station. And from there, I started I had already been 4 years in the Air Force. So I started as a married man on my 5th year in the Air Force. So up to the time I retired, we were both together. Never did I have a separate assignment where we caused us to separate, except once when I went to Thailand. And that was during the Vietnam War in '66. I went over there supporting the aircraft flying bombing missions into Vietnam, and I went there for a year. So I came back. Now, after I got married and joined the Air Force, I said, well, I don't have an education. I don't have anything to bank on if I ever get out of the Air Force. I'm going to have to go to school. And the reason also was that the Air Force was giving me an opportunity that few people outside the armed forces is given, because I was able to go to school and the Air Force would pay all my books, my tuition, everything was given to me. All I needed to do is go to school and make good grades, and I could go and on. However, I needed to do this. I had to go at night school. I would still be responsible for performing on my job, so invariably I made it a point to be an excellent airman so that I would be able to go to school at nights and not have extra duty or anything else that would impede my attendance from going to school in the evenings. And that went on for 7 years. 7 years I went to night school, and I got enough hours, college hours, to be within 30 hours of my degree. At that point, the Air Force had a program called Bootstrap Commissioning Program. I took advantage of that program because I requested that I be released from having to go to work and only concentrate on going to school. And sure enough, the Air Force approved it, and Lord and behold, I was in the same house, drawing the same amount of money, and I was not going to work, but I was going to school.
Full-time student.
Full-time student. Well, after a year, I completed my degree requirements, and I graduated, and then I applied for OTS, Officers Commissioning Program, and I was approved, and I came back to Medina Base here in Lackland, and I went through Officers Training School. And after 90 days, I got my commission. I was commissioned a second lieutenant. I was assigned to an Air Force base, and I was assigned to a new AFSC, we called it. And that's your specialty type of work that you're going to perform. And I was assigned to be a material control officer in support of aircraft, which is totally different from what I had been used to for the past 13 years of dispensing drugs as a pharmacy technician. But, and needless to say, I had to learn another vocabulary. It wasn't a medical vocabulary. I had to learn the maintenance vocabulary to be able to maintain the repairs on all the aircraft. And that took a little bit of an effort. In fact, it took a lot of effort on my part because, again, I had to learn a new vocabulary. But, and all through my pharmacy training, my practical experience, my assignments as a pharmacy technician, I had an awful lot of courses that I had taken through the Air Force. And so that was in addition to the night school that I was taking to get my degree. Well, once I got my degree and was commissioned a second lieutenant, I continued taking courses, and I continued going to special educations and training sessions, all to enhance my career in the Air Force. Because the Air Force gives you an awful lot of educational opportunities, and it's there for your taking. If you don't take advantage of these things, then you have nobody to blame except yourself. And I was a go-getter, and also I must at this point mention my family, my wife. She hardly ever saw me. We were married, but I got up at 5 o'clock, went to work, came back at 4, and studied, and then I went to school at night, back at 10 at night, and then studied, and then go back to work. So but I knew it would pay off in the long run, and I think few people would have done that, I think. But it's there for anyone that is motivated enough to do this. They can do it. I did it. And it seems now that it's very, if I can do it, anybody else can do it. Well, I did it, but at a great cost. Mind you, I was already in my 30s when I was commissioned. The cutoff for commissioning in the Air Force was 32 years. I was commissioned at 31 and a half.
Oh my goodness.
I only had 6 months left. Otherwise, I would never have gone to, been able to go to officers training school because of my age. And what prolonged my commissioning and my education was my 18-month disruption when I went to Thailand. That was in 1966. So that put me back about 18 months in my planned course of action, my education. But nevertheless, I was fortunate to complete my work and get commissioned by the time I was 31 and a half years old. That in itself was a great accomplishment, I think. But then, being bilingual, incidentally, gave me an opportunity, and it opened up an awful lot of doors for special assignments. Assignments, especially in Latin America. Out of my 24 years in the Air Force, I was assigned 10 years to Latin America, attached to the embassy. There's no better duty than being attached to an embassy in a foreign country. Believe me, it is just fabulous. And again, I was picked, and I was re-picked and picked. I went to the Pentagon. I faced an awful lot of officers board in selecting, because the Air Force is particular, the Army, Armed Forces, is particular who they send to represent their country. Because you are directly working with a host Air Force or Army or Navy. You're very well in bed, so to speak, with these people. And any impressions, good or bad, is going to rub off on the, reflect the U.S. So they make darn sure that they pick the right person for the right job. And that's what I did. Thank heavens that I passed, and they approved my assignment. So we went to Ecuador, Quito, Ecuador, and that was just wonderful. I was attached to the embassy, but I did work with the Uruguayan Air Force at their base headquarters for 3 years, and then I came back to the U.S. and I went to Wichita, Kansas, and I went as a supply officer. Well, needless to say, a year later they asked me if I would consider relocating to Montevideo, Uruguay. And I said certainly, based on the fact that I had really enjoyed that special assignment. So we all went, and of course I had to go through the same screening that I had gone previously. I went to the Pentagon, my wife went over there, they interviewed her and everything, you know. And
did you have children by that time?
Oh yes.
So the children went with you?
Yes.
On those assignments?
My car was flown over there from here. My household goods was flown from here. Everything was done for me. When I boarded the airplane going to Latin America, we went through Panama, and we just took a couple of bags, and that was it, because our household goods and my whole baggage, everything was en route, and I didn't need to worry about it. When I got there, there were available, there was an apartment next to the embassy that was used for people in transit, and I was one of them, and I stayed there 30 days, and all during the 30 days we went around and selected a home, a house to live in. And of course it was subsidized by the Air Force, you know, in spite of having quarters allowance. We had quarters allowance plus since it was a foreign country. So we did that for 3 years, both in Quito, Ecuador, and Uruguay, Montevideo, Uruguay. And again, by virtue of being bilingual, I just fit it like a glove with those people, I think. And in Quito, in Montevideo, Uruguay, they made me an honorary officer in their ranks. Oh. And they published the orders, and they went into their files, official files of the armed forces, and I was given the rank of captain as an honorary captain in the Uruguayan Air Force. Not many people get that designation, I think. So, and then after the second, we came back, and then I had about a year left of active duty in the Air Force, because when I was commissioned with a guarantee of 10 years. In other words, I was not going to be rifted or reduced in force during those 10 years. Remember that the 66 and 76 time period, Vietnam was going, And we had an awful lot of people in the armed forces. But after Vietnam, a lot of people got rifted from the Air Force, Army, Navy. We lost a lot of people. Well, I was immune to that because I had been guaranteed 10 years as an officer. And I had 13 years as an enlisted man. So that gave me 23 years and a half that I could retire at the highest rank. My highest rank was a captain, so I retired as a captain. So I tell people that if you are a teenager, especially if you are a senior in high school, you ought to consider what the Air Force, Army, or Navy can do for you. If you don't have a specific goal, or even if you do, maybe the armed forces will have a slot for you. And it will be very economical also, of course, but you have to put the initiative in. They're not going to give it to you free, so to speak. You're going to have to put an awful lot of yourself into these things, like I did. And it was tough. The way I came up through the OTS, Officers Training School, remember, I was 10 years senior to all of the OTS candidates. I had 10 years, I was older. I didn't move as fast. My education was in spurts, whereas these other guys, they went 4 years, graduated, and joined the Air Force. Their minds were sharp. They were sharp as a tack, physically and mentally. These are the people who I had to compete with at Officers Training School. And it took a lot out of me, and in a way I welcomed it because I knew it wasn't going to be easy, and I weathered through all that, and I graduated with the best of them. So that takes care of my Air Force life, and I've mentioned about my roots in Presidio, my parents, but that's only part of my life.
Well, tell us about life since the Air Force.
Well, since the Air Force, I went to work in Mexico as a cost accounting manager because my degree was in business. And I went to work in a maquila, they call it maquila, in Juarez, Mexico. These are companies who, they assemble TVs, they assemble all kinds of things over there, and they're owned by U.S. companies. And all the raw materials that are imported from the States to Mexico is imported duty-free. Now, the only tax that these companies pay for these finished products is value added. In other words, the labor that it costs the company to make these widgets in Mexico. And that's what they are taxed by the Mexican government as duty, export duties. And I did that for 2 years. I worked with the MPEX Corporation. We had, and I was a cost accountant. I was the guy who figured out the cost of all the things that we manufactured and where we should cut expenses and conform to the hours earned. Every widget that is made, the companies assign amount of hours to that widget. It shouldn't take more than that. And then they assign a dollar value to each hour. So if they make 10 widgets, and in 1 hour, they assign 10 times, say, $10 an hour, that would be $100 for that widget, which includes labor, and it includes the material, and anything else that goes in producing that widget. So I did that 2 years in Mexico. But I wasn't really done with traveling overseas. I applied to McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company, and who is a government contractor, and was the maker and builder of the F-15, That's the Cadillac of the Air Force. That's a fighter. And the King of Saudi Arabia had just bought 32 brand new aircraft. And he bought a turnkey operation. He bought all the training that goes into maintaining these aircraft and flying them. He bought all the hangars and all the structures that are required, runways and everything, and training and maintenance and everything for one price. Back then, if you remember, Saudi Arabia was overflowing with petrodollars. That's when oil shot up 400%. And we were paying Saudi Arabia dearly for that oil. So the U.S., there were so many dollars going to Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. was a builder of the F-15, so we traded F-15s for oil. Excuse me. And I was accepted. I was given the job of material controller to go over there. And we went. The whole family went. And mind you, that's halfway around the world. And they provided us with everything. The only thing we need to take was our clothes. Excuse me. We went over there with just 1 or 2 suitcases. From then, we had housing. We had furniture. And we had transportation. I was assigned a car, an Impala. And housing was, we lived in a villa. It was a real nice, big, air-conditioned, modern 4,000 square foot villa, just for the wife and I. Excuse me. And we stayed there 3 years with McDonnell Douglas. And we lived, we went shopping downtown. We rubbed elbows with all the Saudis. And we enjoyed it. We enjoyed it. Granted, the social life is completely different over there. In fact, there's no social life in Saudi Arabia. If you go to Saudi Arabia, you have to contend with going to work, coming home, going to work, coming home. There's no bowling alleys, there's no McDonald's, there's no movies, there's nothing of that kind. Back then, I don't know how it is now, but I doubt it's changed little since then. But anyway, our family was the education of my kids. We could send our kids any school in the world. My son went to school in Switzerland. He went to school in Switzerland. My daughter didn't really enjoy that because she was older than my son and she was already in college. And she was just about to graduate from college. So there was nothing that the Saudis could do for her except give her a round-trip ticket every year to come and see us in Saudi. So we had to contend with that. But my son, he really enjoyed Switzerland over there because they could jump on the train and either go south into Italy or north to Zurich and Germany and all those places. But anyway, and we were given a 15-day R&R every year, leave, 30-day leave every year. And what we used to do is we just toured Europe or we toured Southeast Asia. Since Saudi Arabia was in the middle between here and Saudi Arabia, we could either go east or we could go west. Sometimes we'd go through San Francisco to Saudi, or sometimes we'd go through New York to Saudi and visit all the places in between. And we were also given a very generous per diem while we were on leave. And that took care of all our expenses in visiting all the capitals of Europe. In fact, we were given enough money so that when we got back to Saudi Arabia, we still had money that was given to us from our per diem. We had per diem of $250 a day for each.
Oh my goodness.
$250 for my wife, $250 for me, $250 for Hector. So you can see we were drawing sometimes $700, and that's per diem. Had nothing to do with our pay. You know? And that was great. And one of the guys had 8 kids, and they were little, so they were in country, and the Saudi government paid them per diem just like they paid their father, their mother, and 8 of them. So he was drawing about $2,400 a day to go on R&R. So it was unreal, unreal. So I like that. We did 3 years, and then we came back to the States, and then after a year I wanted to go back again, and I did, but I went with another company, Lear Ziegler, and they supported the F-15 also, and so we went back, and the same thing all over again. It was great. It was really nice, and the wife got to go, and the kids, well, the kids didn't go because by then Hector was already in college. He had gone through high school already. But anyway, we were able to take all the R&Rs and annual leaves together somewhere in Europe. Either we would meet them. One time my daughter and son flew from El Paso to New Delhi on their own because they couldn't go into Saudi Arabia. They wouldn't allow, they wouldn't give them a visa. And so we had to leave Saudi Arabia and go to New Delhi to meet them. And that's what we did. They beat us there by 12 hours. When we got to New Delhi, they had already been in the hotel. They rested and everything. And we went to see the Taj Mahal. We went to see this and that. And then we went to all the main countries in the Near East and Far East, you know. And we came through Bangkok, we went to Hong Kong, we went, and all until we got to Hawaii, and then we came back through the West. And then we continued on to New York and etc. Now what we did, we allowed my wife to spend 3 months here. Then she would go. And then she would spend 3 months in Saudi, and then we'd go either on leave or we'd go on 15-day annual R&R. So we were always planning our leaves with our vacations in mind, so that we could all get together. And we got together for 6-7 years. We got together in Europe because we couldn't get together in Saudi. You know? So that was life. And after having said all these things, when I'm getting ahead of myself right now, but I'm doing it for a reason, that all these things I have documented them in my book. And my book is Moy Boy. That's the name of my book, Moy Boy-51. And the reason it's Moy Boy is that it's the name of my school.
That's right. That's where you were 5 years.
That's where I was 5 years. That's where I learned all the discipline. And it's all documented in the book. And it's a fast-moving book. I don't go into very much details. It's fast, and it includes all the homes and stations and moves that we did. It includes the people that we met and the things that we did and how we did it. And I go back to recommending the book to any young boy or girl that is in high school that would like to consider the military life. There is a life for everybody in the military, but they have to work hard. And probably they have to work a little harder because there's not that many people in the armed forces now. They have downsized it. But nevertheless, you still have an awful lot of opportunities in the Air Force. And I keep referring to the Air Force, certainly because I was in the Air Force, but that's not to say that the other services don't have their own educational opportunities, and that's the name of the game. Education, education. If you can maintain, and I don't mean to say that you have to be a brain, you can just apply yourself, and you'll get through it, just like I did.
So one of the questions that I usually ask is, what life lessons have you learned from your military career? And certainly that would be one of them. Apply yourself diligently and you can succeed. Are there other life lessons?
Well, the life lessons that we have learned as a family is one that we have to rely upon each other. Because in civilian life, you're always probably within a telephone call, within a few miles of people you know, friends, relatives, cousins, whatever, and you can intermingle with them in case you will need something. You can borrow this, or you will need a babysitter or something like that. This is something we never did because it was Alma and I always, and our two kids, because we no longer could stay at a place and develop or cultivate a sense of belonging or a sense of socializing and becoming real good friends, because no sooner than that happened we would have to move. We had 16 moves in the Air Force, 16 moves, and these moves entail going from overseas or out of state, okay? And therefore we were very self-sufficient, and that taught us and to be to do what needed to be done amongst ourselves. If we couldn't go to a movie, we couldn't go without the kids, we wouldn't go. We just stayed home. Mm-hmm. And that takes an awful lot of training, and you have to be, you know, it's something that has to be within you, that you have to do this. So yes, it's the Air Force taught us an awful lot of that. And of course, I went through it because of Moy Military School too. Incidentally, Moy Military School was owned by the Sisters of the Divine Providence. They are the owners of Our Lady of the Lake. Oh. So I was, being a Catholic school, I was also very religious, so to speak, you know. And also they provided a retired colonel as a commandant to take care of the military aspects of the school. They hired a recognized coach, and he had an outstanding athletic program for us. Now mind you, I'm talking about little kids from 8 years to 14 years. But yet we were in competition with Peacock here in San Antonio, TMI, all the military schools. Back then there was an awful lot of military schools in San Antonio, and we marched with the best of them in the Battle of Flowers parade. We competed with them in the Alamo Stadium, and we were elementary school kids. Mm-hmm. Elementary. We had our own crack drill team, and we won many, many prizes, and so all of this rubbed off on us. Not only on me, but the family. You were immersed in a disciplined culture. In a very disciplined culture. Yeah. Few people would even think about doing that. But to us, it felt good.
And you would do it all again, I'm assuming?
In a minute, yes, in a second. I'd do it again.
Sounds like a fascinating life. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to talk about that we haven't touched on?
Well, no. What I have been doing in the last 10, 15 years is borrowing from what we have been discussing, and I have gone into real estate. And I have bought old dilapidated houses, and I've fixed them up and sold them. And that was after I quit subbing in school, you know. And that's what I have been doing, real estate. And I think real estate has been rewarding for us. And again, and I must add that this house and everything with it, and the automobiles, thanks to the Air Force. And thanks to Moy Military School.
Well, you've certainly been blessed, I would say that. Well, let me come over there now, and we'll let me thank you officially. I want to give you this pin from the Veterans History Project to acknowledge your participation today in the interview. And thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you very much for coming over and interviewing me. It's a pleasure, and I've always considered a pleasure serving my country.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy.